Alright everyone, if we can have your attention please. Really pleased to have Lilia Vershynin give us this great Lenten lecture. Lilia's PhD topic, dissertation topic was iconoclasm, right? It was iconoclasm, so probably in the entire world she is one of the greatest experts on this particular topic. Not many PhDs have been done on this topic. So it's really a blessing for us to have Lilia to give us this lecture, and you should also know that she organizes this lecture series, and we are very thankful for her for doing that. So here's the thing, Lilia does not have a loud voice, right? That's neither good nor bad, it's just the reality of the situation. So we'll ask you to really minimize the side conversations and ask parents to try to keep the kids screaming and other types of activities down to a lull so that everyone can hear. And not just people who are here, but also people who will be watching on video and listening on audio later. So thank you for being attentive to that. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Lilia Vershynin.
Yeah, thank you, Father Gregory, and thank you for the chance to share with you what I know about Byzantine iconoclasm. So today we are celebrating the Feast of Orthodoxy. And the Feast of Orthodoxy relates also to the icon restoration, to the restoration of icon worship, which means that before the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which restored the icon worshiping, there was a strict prohibition to venerate icon, to honor icon, to produce icon. So in 754, the Iconoclastic Council of Lilia placed a strict ban on icons, making it the subject of royal law. So if you are a clergyman, you would be anathematized. If you are a layman, you would be a subject of royal law in case you venerate icon, you produce icon. So it was prohibited in the Byzantine Empire. So it's very interesting. Suddenly, we got this law. Suddenly, the council, where there were about 360 bishops who participated in this pretend ecumenical council, and they prohibited icon veneration. So it's very interesting why it happened. And there are many different theories which try to explain why it happened. Although the focus of my presentation today will be not historical events, not different theories which try to explain why iconoclasm happened in the Byzantine Empire, but what I want to talk about today, what I want to invite you to think about, the way how iconoclasts thought, the way of their thinking, and the way how icon worshippers, those people who defended icon worshiping, how they thought. So I want to invite you to think about what is an icon, what is an idol, what is idolatry. So this will be the focus of my presentation. But I want to briefly mention the existing explanations of iconoclasm, why it happened. So one of the explanations that iconoclasm had political and social reasons. That it was a conflict of church and state interests. Because emperors, they were iconoclasts at that time, and church hierarchy, they were iconoclasts. While icon worshippers, defenders of icon, they were monks and simple people. And another interesting fact, Russian Tsar Peter the Great, he was very sympathetic with iconoclasts, with their position. He stated that in the Byzantine Empire, army at that time was weak, while this society had so many monks. So you can see that this is one of the possible explanations. Another theory which tries to explain why iconoclasm happened, Muslim influence. The emperors, they grew up in the environment where Muslims has lots of influence. This is another explanation. And finally, another explanation which is called Christological explanation. And Patriarch Nicephorus, who was a leader of those who defended icon worshiping, who defended icons, he also heresy, monophysite heresy. He saw it, and iconophiles themselves saw iconoclasm as a campaign against incarnation of Christ. The way how it works, why they thought that it's monophysite heresy, iconoclasm. Because iconophiles, they say we depict icons because we saw Christ. Christ was a historical figure. We saw him, we can depict Christ because we saw him. Probably you know that the church doesn't allow to depict the Father God. You probably saw these icons, but they are not canonical. I saw it even in some churches, mosaics, but it's not canonical to depict Father God. Why? Because we didn't see him. However, we did see Christ, and that's why iconophiles claim we can't depict Christ because we saw him. If we saw him, why we can depict Christ? So, if iconoclasm prohibited to depict Christ, iconophiles saw it as a threat to our faith that Christ incarnated. Christ became a man. So this is another explanation of iconoclasm. And of course, in my dissertation, I needed to make some contribution to bring something from my research. And my approach was that it relates, iconoclasm also related to how people saw person, what we can depict in person. It relates to how iconophiles and the defenders of icon, how they understood person, personality, idolatry, and image. So very few sources survived about iconoclasts because due to the defeat of iconoclasm, due to icon restoration, many texts were burned. They were destroyed. However, iconophiles extensively quoted iconoclasts in order to reply to their arguments. And that's why these quotes survive. And my research, so I tried to read all existing sources, all quotes which they have so far, what iconoclasts claimed, why they thought that icon worshiping is idolatry. So we have quotes of iconoclasm in the text of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, where icon worshippers explain why we can worship icons, where they reply to the arguments of iconoclasts. So thinking about the contemporary iconoclastic arguments, nothing new. So whatever you hear today, it was already in the Byzantine society. So every single argument which I heard in the contemporary discussions about icons, they were discussed there. And let's make a test. What do you think? So what is most widespread argument that why we can't worship icons? What is the most widespread one?
Because God forbid to depict in the Old Testament?
Right, Old Testament, exactly. So here you go. John of Damascus, this is another source of text about Byzantine iconoclasm. He was inspired defense of icons during the first period of iconoclasm. There were two periods, one in the 8th century and another one in the 9th century. So John of Damascus, he was a leader. He brought a theory during the first period of iconoclasm. And from his quote, we can see that this was the main argument, the Old Testament. And his work is called the Treatise on the Divine Images. So the argument was that icon worshiping is a violation of that Old Testament prohibition, a prohibition against idols. So prohibition wasn't, of course, about icons, but it was against idols. So here is the quote by John of Damascus. But those who do not search out the meaning of Scripture say that God said through Moses, the lawgiver, do not make any likeness, whether of things in heaven or things on the earth. And through David the prophet lets those who venerate carved images to be put to shame, those who put in the John of Damascus quotes the argument of iconoclast, this Old Testament prohibition of idolatry. Not icon worshiping, but idolatry. So the argument of iconoclast was that icon of Christ attempts to replace Christ. So the image replaces God. Constantine V, the iconoclastic emperor, his argument was that the icon should be identical with that what it represents. Representation should not be like the original meaning that who we depict, but it should be essentially the same. What do we have in our Orthodox Church? What kind of image which is essentially the same as God, same in essence? Yeah.
Vershynin?
Vershynin, but it's not the essential essence is not of God. The essence of God.
73 people partook of that essence today.
Yeah. Yeah, Father Gregory got pronounced. Yes, Eucharist. So having this argument, the only image which you can have, according to the iconoclast argument, their way of thinking is Eucharist.
Yes.
Communion. This is the only what we have essentially, in essence, the same as God. It's not like the God, but it's God Himself.
Lilia, can I ask you a question so that we have clarification? Can you talk about the difference between latria and dulia? The difference of worship. Do you know what I'm talking about, these different words?
Worshipping
and venerating.
Yeah, I wouldn't go into this direction, so
Can I just briefly say something then? Because
yeah.
you're using worship, and that's actually, in Russian we have exactly the same problem. Poklonitsa. It means both things, but in Greek there are two words that very clearly, actually they're Latin, but anyway, that clearly distinguish latria and dulia. Latria, it's worship of God Himself. This is the only God can truly be worshipped in this way. Dulia, it means basically the best translation is veneration. We venerate the relics of the saints. We venerate the icons, but we don't have the same attitude to the icon as we have to God per se, right? And so it's important to distinguish between these so that people don't get confused, especially because we sort of not carefully might use those words and it could lead people to get confused. So there's two sorts of ways that we approach. There is worship and there is veneration. Worship is for God, veneration is everything else.
Could I interject something?
Say something, John.
I was going to about this. I heard a wonderful sermon that was very interesting for me in terms of learning about Orthodoxy by Father Sergei Vishnevsky, Father Pavel's thing. And he made exactly the distinction you made.
Right.
He said, we don't worship them, we venerate them.
Right.
And I think it was important. And I was kind of...
And I'm very sympathetic to Lilia because in Russian it's the same word.
Yeah.
So you have to translate one word into two different things, either venerate or worship. So just so everyone understands that way we won't have any anathemas cast after the lecture.
I will use the word honoring.
It's okay. I'm not picking at you. I totally understand, but I don't want people to get confused.
Yeah.
So let's continue. The iconoclastic imperative argument was that the only possible image of Christ is Eucharist. More general idea here that a material cannot represent God. Something material cannot represent something living. And this idea was common for Muslims at that time. And it's interesting that there exist examples of Islamic art which attempted to animate representations of plants and animals. So they tried to animate them. And I remember some tales which goes from the medieval time when they tried to make a replica of a bird. They tried to make it look real, like indeed real. So using art, they had these attempts at this time. So this idea that only living can represent living. And here is example why some researchers believe that iconoclastic arguments, they got influenced by Islamic, it was Islamic influence. So iconoclastic conclusion that any representation which is not alive, any manufactured thing, here is a threat of idolatry. If it is material, material cannot represent something living, there is a threat of idolatry here. Moreover, iconoclasts treated everything material as inferior. There was an opposition of material to the living spirit, and I see here also Platonic influence here. Opposition of material and something living. John of Damascus defended icons, here is his quote, "Do not abuse matter, for it is not dishonorable. This is the view of many peers." So from his quote, we can see that iconoclasm, they put down the material world. And it is actually a common term among the iconoclasm, dead art. Here is another quote. "He who thinks to reinstate the states of the poles by means of a dead art, which has never been alive, but rather has been invented in vanity by the adversary pagans, proves himself blasphemous." So iconoclasts, they were against anything material, and they went even further. They depreciated body, not only material, but also person's body. And this is quoted by the iconoclastic emperor Constantine V. "Since that which concerns Christ dispersed and dissolved, it follows also which concerns the saints disappears at the same time, and that which remains is not worth remembering." So they put down the body. And you can see this is not Orthodox perspective, right? We can see what role material world plays in the Orthodox Church and also the body. So, and you can see that the iconoclastic approach, their thinking was very different. So iconoclasts believe that a corrupted icon reduces God to a base material nature. If people honor icons, they honor a material thing, and they reduce God's nature to the material. Actually, absolute iconoclasm, like denial of any images wasn't probably possible. It didn't exist in history. So iconoclasts, they did accept some images. And the question, what kind of images iconoclasm accepted? They were not against what kind of images. So three types of images: symbolic, ethical, and verbal. So they accepted only symbolic representation of God, which is one of them, of course, cross. So what all iconoclastic emperors did, Leo III, Constantine V, Leo V, they replaced icons with crosses. Wherever on the gate they should be placed icons, where they were icons before the iconoclasts, they put crosses. Why crosses? Since they depreciated material thing, cross is a symbol. According to them, it has living connection with the living God. So they allowed cross representation. Can you remember another very ancient symbolic representation of Christ?
Fish.
Fish, yes, what else?
Rooster.
Which goes back to the Bible.
Rooster.
What else? Lamb, right? And actually, iconophiles, defenders of icon, they were very cautious that after iconoclasm, this symbolic representation of Christ, because they saw threat there against about symbolism and again putting down the fact that Christ got incarnated, he was in the human form. So you can see here some contradiction between symbolism and historicity. Another acceptable image, and they apply this word to this. Christian virtues and deeds. So iconoclasts, they called it images. They said these are the true and only possible images of Christ, Christian virtues and deeds. They said Christians are living icons rather than dead representations. And the quote from them, "And living represents living." So the conclusion here that what iconoclasm believed, that the true image of a person can be provided only by symbols, virtues, deeds, and words. So they were not against any image. And even Muslims, they accepted ornaments, symbols, and their pictorial representations. So what they were against the human form, which they believed causes idolatry. So enough iconoclasm. So I covered what iconoclasts believe. Now let's move to iconophiles.
And just so everyone understands, we're iconophiles, right?
Iconophiles meaning defenders of icons.
Want to make sure everybody's not confused.
So iconophiles, or defenders of icons, viewed icons in a different way. Iconoclasts claim that icons reduce God to a futile appearance, but iconophiles claim, defenders of icons claims icons do not represent an appearance. Iconoclasts claim that icons can't grasp the essence of a person or God, while iconophiles said that icons do not aim at grasping any essence. So what icons represent? So icon represent a person. Russian word личность, Greek hypostasis, Latin persona. Icon represent that what one sees when looking at a person. It's not material. It's not attempt to grasp some essence like in the Platonic view, in the Platonic direction of thought. It's not body. It's a person. Person, when I look at somebody, I see a person. Not any component of him, but the person itself. So icon represents a person, hypostasis. And a good parallel here, person photo ID. Same aim, I identify a person. And probably they can come up many videos of saints when a person tells that I saw a dream and I saw somebody, I didn't recognize him, I entered the church and I recognized right away it was some saints. So a person was identified because the person itself represented in the icon. Iconophiles, defenders of icons, and iconoclasts, they also differently understood idolatry. Iconoclasts claim that idolatry is a substitution of God by an icon, by something material. While defenders of icons, they claim that idolatry is rather representing an adoration of a wrong deity, non-existing gods. An interesting fact, educated pagans, they also claim that our statues are not gods. They are representations of other gods. So what idolatry here is adoration of the wrong, non-existing gods. Adoration of not the true God. So this is iconophiles' way of thinking. It's not replacement of God, it's adoration of the wrong, non-existing gods. So the problem here is not material representation, but with the representation of something non-existent. So iconophiles, defenders of icons, they had problems with idolatry. Why? Because people venerated non-existing gods. They didn't venerate the true God. Iconophiles claim that Christ's incarnation, God's existence as man, precluded idolatry. Icons depict what people saw, rather than representation of fantasy, something non-existent. Icon is a visual representation of a historical person, and therefore should never be confused with an idol. And a quote from the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the council which restored icon worshiping, which restored honoring icons. What is an idol? Asked the apostle. Or what is the food offered to idols? But that which is the Gentile sacrifice to demons and not to God. So the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Iconoclasts needed to define what is idolatry, and here is how they understood idolatry. According to Iconoclasts, what makes something an idol is subject of representation. Who is depicted here? Is this subject real, historical? Is it a true God, rather than a replacement of true God by the image? Another prominent defender of icons who developed a beautiful theory of image and proto-image, Theodor the Studite. In Russian, Theodor Studit. He developed the dialectics of image, icon, and proto-image, the one who is represented in the icon. So his idea, to put it in one sentence, his theory, which is the basis of, in our Orthodox Church, why we worship the icons, the icon image is different from the one who is represented in the icon by essence, by the material, but it is the same in likeness, in name and likeness. So Constantine V, the Iconoclastic emperor, he said that the only true image of God, what is essentially the same, what is the same in essence, like Eucharist, there is blood, Christ's blood there. While Theodor the Studite says that icon is different in the material, there is no body there is no blood, Christ's blood there. But it is the same as God. That's why there is no any possibility of replacement there, because it's the same in name and likeness. Sounds complicated, but in everyday life you probably see it all the time. For instance, a child. You show a picture him of his mother. What does he say? Mom. Does he stupid not to understand that this is not her flesh and body? Or does he replace his... does this picture replaces his mother? Nothing like that. He does understand that it's a picture, but kissing the picture of the mother, he honors his mother, he expresses the love to his mother, because it is the same in likeness, because hypostasis, mother hypostasis, richness, her person is there in this picture. It is the same in name and likeness. It's different in the material, but same in likeness. That's why Iconophiles ruled out this problem with replacement. How something which is the same in likeness can replace God? Because icon is the same in name and essence, in name and likeness. So there is no any possibility of idolatry here. And actually, Iconoclasts reminded Iconoclasts how they respectfully treated the image and portraits of emperors, and that disrespect to an emperor makes it subject to royal law. This is due to the fact that image portrait of the emperor is the same with emperor himself in likeness. So they reminded, how come that you say that icon replaces God and it's idol, while you treat with such respect the portrait of the emperors? Bishop of Bukhara, he said, try to depict emperor's mother in some bad form, and you will see what happens. And they were very upset. You do it with the icons of Christ. You burn them because you think these are idols. Try to burn emperor's image and see what happens. So they saw a contradiction here, that they have this same approach to which Iconophiles has to icons. The Iconoclast has same approach to portraits of emperors, but they couldn't put together these things, honoring icons and honoring emperors' portraits. And another important quote in the Iconoclastic Controversies, the quote by Basil the Great, which was very widely used by Iconophiles. You probably heard it. I believe it also used during some service. The honor shown to the it's probably today's service. The honor shown to the image is transmitted to its model, God. So we honor not idol, we honored the god, because the honor which we express to an icon, it is transmitted to the one who is represented there. This quote was before Fyodor the Studai developed his dialectics of image and proto-image, but iconophiles use this quote very often. And moreover, iconophiles, so this quote from John the Chrysostom. They requested even iconographers to treat icons with the proper respect, their work, the quote here. But after having applied the paints, they are no longer able to erase or redraw anything, because that would damage the beauty of the image, and such action would be blameworthy. Because they said, since even if you produce this icon, you should treat it with respect after you put the colors, because now it's the same in likeness with God. So you should treat your product of your, even if it's product of your work, you should treat it with respect. And I will finish my presentation by the quote from the Seventh Ecumenical Council. This is the icon of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which has restored icon worshiping. Drawing upon the Holy Fathers, the honor of the icon is conveyed to the prototype. When one looks at the icon of a king, he sees the king in it. Thus, he who goes to the icon goes to the king in it, for it is his form and his characteristics that are on the icon. So, any questions or thoughts?
John has a question.
Well, more of a thought, if I may. My understanding, and it may have been from that sermon that I did hear in the Soviet Union from Father Sergei, was that the origins of the icons was an attempt, it was part of telling the story to people, that many people who were illiterate. And I think that is a very important part of understanding it, and an interesting part.
It's very important. If you think about the history of Christianity, it's only in the last 2 or 3 generations that a majority of people were literate. If for the vast, vast history of Christianity, most people, the vast majority of people, were totally illiterate. And so the icons provided a very important teaching tool for them. I think it would be interesting to talk briefly about iconoclasts that we have today. Because even though the Seventh Ecumenical Council said no more iconoclasm, not everybody listened. So there are iconoclasts today. Does anyone know of iconoclasts?
Protestants,
We can't say Protestants because that's too broad. We have to be more specific.
Yeah, you can't say that, because the Episcopalians, for instance, they have icons.
And so do Lutherans have a lot of icons too. So but some Protestants, yes.
Yeah.
Presbyterians are definitely, unquestionably iconoclasts, but they use art, and I always like to tease them, because they use light as art, actually. And those who are honest about it, they know that they do that, but they don't depict the image of God. And others, Pentecostals are iconoclasts, very strong iconoclasts. They're actually anti-Trinitarian also. And there are others as well. Mormons are iconoclasts. Only very loosely would you be able to call them Christians. What about non-Christians? Who knows the most famous? Muslims. That's where, if you look at it from a political point of view, as Lilia was saying, you can make an argument that this was a reaction to the growth of Islam in the south of Byzantium. Whether that's true or not. Jews, there's a lot of iconography. They don't depict God because they don't have Christ. So it actually makes sense from our point of view. If they don't say that Christ is the Savior, if they don't say that He's God, they can't depict the Father. But they do use a lot of iconography, and the Church uses the iconophiles used the Old Testament actually against the iconoclasts. Right? They used where Moses received from God how they were supposed to decorate the tabernacle with seraphim and with other iconographic symbols. That the iconoclast tries to use the Old Testament against the iconophiles, and they turned it right around and said, no, look, God commanded Israel to create icons. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And I think that was one of the strongest arguments, actually.
Have
Marina?
you ever seen Jewish icons.
Jewish icons.
You
Art?
said that they do.
Oh, well, they use
like
art.
seraphims, or you said that.
Yeah, I think they still use them, and they were supposed to be for the tabernacle, but I think in synagogues they still have them as well.
They do?
Yeah, so
Some of them.
So
Go
I
ahead.
think there are three periods in the Jewish history. Before the Greek invasion, Greek conquests of Alexander the Great, they almost didn't have anything, just ornaments, I guess, in synagogues. Then during the Alexander the Great, and after maybe 200 years, they actually had some images that came from Greece, and then you can see them in the Holy Land. And then after the fall of Jerusalem and everything else, it disappeared again. So now I think they are iconoclasts.
Well, they kind of are, but that's in violation actually of the Torah, where Moses is told that they should use them. So, but that's not Moses' fault. He told them, and they.
Compared to Muslims, they just say you can't draw, image of God. No. So Jews, they say the same, or it's
Muslims?
not clear what they think. No, Jews.
Oh, Jews.
And if you saw in the presentation that the problem was that we used them at that time also human representation. So not like birds or ornaments, human representation. Can we depict a person? So I guess you can't express the essence of a person by the art.
In just a minute, I have to be part of this conversation.
Jews,
Yeah, to know what Jews, what their point of view on this subject. I mean, modern kind of, what
They can
think.
depict nature, but not humans.
They can,
I think they can depict nature, but not humans. I
the
think
same,
that's-
okay.
Stephen had something, and then Panayoti.
The Muslims are making it a main point of their radicalization by punishing severely anybody that dares to take Muhammad or steps. So that's absolute active economism right there, Obama.
and I also I was converted from Protestantism to Orthodoxy, and one of the reasons why I have chosen this topic because it took me a year to work it out with myself, this iconoclastic view of images. And what I realized while I studied this topic, and it was discussed in the iconoclastic debates, that iconoclasts see an idol in the icon. It's in their mind, not icon worshiper. So, and I can feel it from my experience when I was a Protestant. I couldn't see anything else but an idol there, because my mind was iconoclastic in a way. And this was one of the reasons why I have chosen this topic, because I was a Protestant and I wanted to study, I wanted to read whatever was available about iconoclasm and what arguments iconophiles brought.
I can understand your position. My wife is strong Muslim. I would worship her at church, and she wanted to prove to me that the Orthodox Church was a cult because we worshiped icons and other things. So it took her, when she converted during Holy Week. She didn't know one word of English, of Greek. She went to the Greek service of the Holy Week, and after that she realized that's where she needed to convert to the Orthodox faith then. And she took her over about the same time, about a year, to be able to even do her cross in front of an icon, not much less kiss the icon. So I can understand it's a common theme when Protestants convert to Orthodoxy.
And we had a debate with my husband, who was an Orthodox and I was a Protestant, about whether it's an idol or not.
I want to touch on something Father Gregory
So
said.
he won.
Father Gregory was talking about people only in the last few centuries become literate, so they can read and understand what they're saying. I'm also of the position that when we look at an icon, we also have to be visually literate. We have to understand what the icon is saying. For example, I'm looking at the icon of the Transfiguration. There's so much going on in the icon. If you don't know the story, you don't understand the scripture behind it, you don't know what it is.
Exactly, that's what I've heard the icons described as a teaching tool.
It is a teacher, it is very much so, yes.
You can look at it, but you still need a teacher to
So,
walk you through
to
it.
tell you the story, you know. And I'm not sure what the translation is in Russian, but in Greek, to be an iconographer, you actually word translates to, he was writing the icon. You're not painting the icon.
That's exactly in Russian. Yes.
So you are
Not
telling,
in English.
when you write an icon, you're actually telling the story with the icon. I'm sure that was used as part of the defense of the icons at that time as well. I'm sure that's a very important point. A great teaching tool. You know, I spent a lot of time in Adrian, Illinois County. There's a lot of Protestants that I think thought that there was New Testament was on their table at their bedside in the first century. You know, and you talk to them, and they think they had the Bible right then, right after Christ died. The Bible's there. Talking. Well, it took a long time to develop the Bible, many writings, and the icons became a part of that whole tradition. It's not just one thing or the other. We have Orthodox have more than 5 things that put together our understanding of God, really.
Icons were way before Bible.
Oh, yes.
Maybe Lilia, could you tell us who was the first iconographer?
I think St. Luke.
Even Jesus Christ, who
Well, yeah,
Right.
yes.
That's the trick question. Everybody says St. Luke, but it was actually Jesus
Yes,
Christ.
that's right.
and actually it was in the beginning of my presentation, this icon.
It will wake up in a second. There we go.
You got me on that one.
Рукотворный.
That should look familiar because that's the icon that we have here in our parish for veneration.
I think I made a picture of the real icon of the 14th century in the Russian Museum in Moscow. This is from the Russian Museum.
Other questions or comments?
I have a question. So when icon start to excrete, like cry or near, right? And when miracles, right, like that happens, how does that? I mean, where is that about? This is a material thing, right? Like our mother's pictures, they don't cry, right? But somehow some kind of stuff happens that happens to icons. What can you say?
Yeah, I see your question. I understand your question, but so I specialized in the text of the Iconoclasts and defenders of icons, and at that time this question hasn't been discussed. I don't know if this existed here or not. I'm not sure, but it didn't come up in the text, so it's probably a better question for the public.
Even old texts of law of God, so this very sort of basic textbook, talk about how there were very, very few immerse streaming icons in the history of the church. Very few, just a handful. In our times, it happens, it seems like all the time. So why? I don't know the reason for that, why it's happening more often now. I can say, interestingly, in our diocese, if something happens, if any holy thing begins to manifest any sort of miracle whatsoever, has to be immediately transferred to the diocesan cathedral, and there the bishop will examine it and make sure that it's really a true manifestation of God's grace. That was always the case in Russia as well. I assume it was true in Greece and everywhere. Also because it's you want to be 1,000 times sure that this is something that is real. Otherwise, in the end, it hurts people's faith if it's something that's not real. So so our diocese, which as far as I know is the only diocese that adopted this practice. If anything happens, has to be transferred immediately to the diocesan cathedral, and it stays there as long as the bishop decides it will stay. And people go to that holy thing. It doesn't come to them. So in the church abroad, we have an interesting practice with the miracle working icon, Kursk icon, in that it travels to parishes. Right? This, in the history of the church, you would say this is an anomaly, but this is due to the immigration. People were on the move. from the time of the Russian Civil War through the World War II, and the icon was moving with the people, and so it always became the tradition that the icon went to people instead of people just coming to the icon. In Kursk, the icon was either in the cathedral or it was in the monastery, and that's it. It didn't go around to different places. But because of the immigration, this is sort of a little different tradition that we have. So in any case, the question was about the why do the icons do this? Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. What the tradition of the church is, though, is whenever there's some kind of miraculous manifestation, immediately it should call us to repentance. That should be our first response.
So that's what is going on nowadays.
It may be.
It's more and more people look.
Right, so this is always what the church has taught. Whenever there's a miraculous manifestation, it's not Facebook, it's not, whatever, it's repentance. And if we can adopt this appropriate, I think, approach, then we will never get ourselves into a funny position, because, of course, the devil can do miracles too. It's not, so it's important for us, as the fathers say, you won't be condemned for being careful, but for being gullible, it's a different thing. So I'm not saying that the icons that are manifesting, streaming myrrh and so on and so forth aren't real. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I like what our bishops decided, that we're going to be 100 times, 1,000 times sure before we start saying to people, here is a miracle, pray. So that was a little sermon that really didn't have that much to do with your question, but I think it was timely, so I hope you forgive me.
Enjoyed it.
Other questions or comments?
So what is the status in our church of the icon of God the Father?
This is a good question. So, does everybody know what we're talking about? The New Testament Trinity versus the Old Testament Trinity?
The icon, yeah.
The one that's in the altar. So, strictly speaking, in the Russian Church, that the depiction of that particular icon is not. We shouldn't say kosher because that's mixing two religions, but it's certainly not promoted. Let's put it that way. In the Russian Empire, I think they were relatively successful in removing those icons from metropolitan areas, but not in villages. The problem with this icon, it's depicting Christ twice. It's not the Ancient of Days is Christ. The Ancient of Days is not God the Father. No one has seen the Father. There is absolutely no question about that. So that icon, the reason that it's kind of not... If you say that it's God the Father, then it's not canonical. Because it's impossible to depict what has not been seen. If you say that it's the Ancient of Days, therefore it's Christ, then it's not sensical. So it's either non-canonical or... But there is a tradition, especially... as I can see it, that came out of southern and western Ukraine, where that icon was very widely venerated and was often painted and often depicted. And so it sort of became not promoted, but somewhat acceptable. So I guess the... Tolerable, that's the word that we want to use. So the only real depiction that of the Trinity that we can kind of say that the Church blesses with both hands is the image of the three angels with Abraham and Sarah. That is the most traditional. Right, that happened. That's a thing that actually happened, was seen by human eyes. Therefore, it can be depicted. The Ancient of Days was seen by the prophet, so it's okay to show that icon, but you can't really say it's Trinity. Because it's Christ, and the Holy Spirit.
What's about Rudolph icon there? Since it's also...
So that with the three angels.
Oh, okay.
That's considered an icon of the Holy Trinity that's more sort of acceptable. I think if we went to the sort of letter of the law, you could even argue that maybe even that would not be appropriate. But I think that's much more appropriate because it's something that happened. It's actually the three strangers came to Abraham in the guise of angels. And so the church accepts that. Abstractly, you can argue that God, the Holy Trinity, has never been seen, but in that way, he was. So, but the New Testament Trinity is a lot less, let's say it's a lot less canonical than that one. But you do find it, and especially because also, this is part of the immigration story also, it had to do with where people came from when they came out, mostly from the south and the west. People who were farther east and north didn't come out in the immigration. And so that iconography that was widespread in the south and the west influenced the immigration iconography a lot more strongly than did the iconography from the north and from the east of the Russian Empire.
And there is one more thing, which is when I studied the text of Iconophiles, 7th ecumenical cancer, I found it a little bit contradictory to the existing tradition as blessing icons and crosses, because Iconophiles openly said that you don't need to do it because they are sanctified by, as a matter of fact, because of this failures to die theory, because icon is the same with God in likeness. And that's why it shouldn't be blessed, because it is blessed by...
That it's not necessary, yes. And that's absolutely true. And I mean, it's in the Seventh Ecumenical Council. That being said, it became the tradition of the church that we bless icons, and I don't think that it takes away from the icon. But I totally agree with Lilia. Strictly speaking, it's not necessary.
But I can't remember, but I think the prayer of kind of blessing the icon is not about blessing the icon itself, but for the people who use it.
It is for the people who use the icon.
It's not strictly speaking.
Right, you're not really sanctifying because the whole point is we don't worship wood and paint, right? That's the whole point. So you don't have to bless the wood and the paint. And actually there's a tradition, if I understand it correctly, maybe Lilia can correct me. I think in many Greek icons they actually use relics of the saints as part of the preparation of the icon. So there are relics of the saint kind of in the icon itself.
And now what came out of my mind, probably it served one more purpose of placing the icons and kind of checking that it's something reasonable is represented there.
Because the priest has to look at it, yes.
Right,
and I think in the Russian Empire that was really important because we were constantly and still are fighting paganism. And so you can find lots of really wild icons that were painted during the time of the Russian Empire. Not usually in the cities, but again in the villages. You can find just incredible stuff. So the fact that it had to go to the priest first before somebody could put it in the house is a very logical check. But Roman's right. The prayer is basically asking that those who pray before this icon will be blessed. I know what I wanted to say. You said about miracle-working icons. Actually, strictly speaking, every icon is a miracle-working icon. It's just what we consider it to be raised to get to the word miracle. Then we start to say, oh, this is a miracle-working icon. But every icon is a window to the heavenly kingdom, and so it's in and of itself a miracle. Stephen, you had questions?
No, you were talking about the depiction of the Holy Trinity. I wanted to just, is it the one I've seen of Jesus on the right side and an old great-haired man on the left side, and the dove or the star in the middle? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one that's a little...
I've been curious about that one for a long time.
Yeah. Like I said, it's less canonical, let's just say that, so that we don't get ourselves into an endless argument about it, but it's less canonical. Father Vladimir's had a lot of questions, and he's in the dark over there, so we...
So I assume that prohibited icons reduces the ways to express mystical experiences. And basically, there are two ways. People just hear things or see things too. So if you reduce one way, you're left with what you hear. Right? So I wonder in Byzantine Empire, what did they do with those people who, for example, say, okay, I'm a simple man and I saw the God of Mother, and God of Mother appears many times to people, and that's how we have many icons, because it appears to someone. So what would Emperor say to that if the person actually painted the icon to represent what the person has seen.
What would iconoclasts say to that?
Iconoclastic emperors, they prohibited just any depiction of icons.
They didn't care whether you saw it or not.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, they didn't care. They said that's idol period. That's an idol period.
So it's
That
just
you can depict. So that's why, how I incorporated this in my dissertation, because I got PhD degree in sociology, not in theology. It relates to what a person is. Because iconoclast said you can't grasp human essence, and so there was no visual aspect there. And actually, what I wrote in my dissertation about the Western concept of identity, it's a little bit iconoclastic because it doesn't have any visual component, while Greek hypostasis or Russian lичность, лицо, it has visual. So these iconoclastic debates, they relate to how we understand what a person is. And Constantine the Fifth said, material cannot represent a living being. So it's an idol period.
I'm also thinking about social implications. So if you don't let people paint what they have seen and they cannot express that, it's like, you know, Freud's thing, suppression of certain things, and then people just start telling stories, and stories become rumors. So it's a recipe for you know, disaster. I mean, social chaos, and it's a stupid thing.
This is why the reason I call this iconophiles approach historical approach. This is historicity. We can depict what we saw. Yeah, and this is a historical fact. So Christ got incarnated. We saw him. We depict him how we saw him.
And the issue all still comes down to venerating an icon. That's what it was about. Venerating, not, you know, iconoclasts did not want you to venerate an icon.
And depict not only.
Well, they could still call it an art form. They can still call it a piece of art.
Yeah, but they prohibited even to depict any human form, even if you don't go, if you're not going to honor it. Prohibition of depiction.
What
They
about
didn't have any art? Wow. With
It's a representation of human form.
It's just like Islam. There's no
but
depiction of human form.
Oh, really? It was
Or a
like
Calvinist
this.
church.
The Calvinists,
The only thing in a Calvinist church you see is a
Not
cross.
just church, but in life. I mean, no, just not. I thought they have some.
I think
So sculptures the same. You can. At
Yeah,
that time, this is no
they said we
sculptures.
want to exclude any possibility, any chance of idolatry.
So crosses were okay, right?
Right.
Right.
And they
it
put
was
on
a symbol.
On the Chalcedon
Polka dot.
gates, they put the cross instead of. They have removed the icon and put the cross.
What about relics?
It's correlated. It's a good question. It's always correlated. Iconoclasm will always correlate relationship to monks, to relics. It's all correlated. And
relics,
Peter the Great, he was very sympathetic with iconoclasm. He didn't like monks. He didn't like relics. He put lots of irony into it.
yes, but iconoclasm was against relics.
Yeah, and again, it's again in relation to material world. They just depreciated anything material.
Before we close, I want to. Lilia mentioned St. John of Damascus, and I think that people probably don't know enough about St. John. Maybe, and certainly that's my fault. He also happens to be celebrated on the same day as St. Barbara. That's really difficult because she is also a very popular saint. St. John of Damascus, from a theological point of view, is one of the most important saints in the history of the church. He had such an interesting upbringing. He was brought up with the future head of the Muslim state. They were raised together as children. He is a Christian, and because the Muslims always had Christians for treasurers, they didn't trust their brothers. So his dad was the treasurer of the Muslim caliphate, and so he was brought up with the future caliph, who later cut off his hand, and it was miraculously put back on. Anyway, the point is that St. John wrote a treatise called On the Orthodox Faith. This is perhaps the single most important explanation of orthodoxy. On the Divine Images is also important, although I don't think that it exists in English. At least I haven't been able to find it.
I think it exists because I quoted in my dissertation.
Oh, maybe, okay, so it may exist. But in any case, St. John is a very, very important saint. I was really happy to see that in Saratov, the theological seminary took St. John as their patron saint. And I think that's just great, because St. John the Divine, the Apostle, he's always thought of as sort of the ultimate theologian, or St. Gregory, St. Basil, whatever, St. John. But this St. John of Damascus is so important to Orthodoxy, and if you ever, I would strongly suggest to everyone to start working on this, on the Orthodox faith. It will take you years to get through it. You can read a sentence, and then you have to let your brain kind of comprehend it for a couple of days, and then you can read another sentence, but it's really, really worth reading. And if you ever take my dogmatic theology class, you'll have to read it. Anyway, St. John is a very important saint that we don't know enough about him, I think, in the Russian church, and I think it's good for us to seek out more about him, and I will try to, in our parish, increase his veneration.
I think that everybody knows Триручница, да? Богородица. It's completely with, St. John.
Yes, and speaking of St. John, we do have someone who is named after St. John in our parish. It happens to be Greta's husband, John, and that's good. I think that's very good. And St. John was in the running for the patron saint of our diocesan seminary, but another St. John got it, St. John of Kronstadt, who's also an important theologian. But in any case, learn more about St. John of Damascus. You won't be sorry for it. Any other questions or comments?
I have, actually, funny one. So there is actually a new thing that amazing. You can watch how St. John of San Francisco blesses you, and it's on the video, right? So he's saying, and something now we have something new that never was before. It's actually a movie, right? You see. So how is that kind of an icon, or like what do we do with that kind of
I mean,
footage?
you don't have to venerate the movie, but as iconophiles, we would have no problem with this. But iconoclasts, I think, would not like the movie, right? They would say that you should not have a movie. No, it didn't, of course, but I mean, if they were against painted depictions, you would think that they will be against video depictions.
Yeah, probably. Although it looks like alive, they wanted the image to be very alive.
Yeah.
But I feel like when I watched that, right, but he blessed you, and he was bishop at least. And I feel like, just bow my head because he blesses me.
Well, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Other questions, comments? It's been a great lecture. Lilia, thank you very much. Appreciate it.